Okay, the biggest thing that you should keep in mind today is that I squared equals -1. It's the most important one that I told you need to know, and you'll need to use them today to do the problems that we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to divide and rationalize the denominator. Anytime that you see, let's get this straightened out right here. Anytime that you see an I in that denominator, in all three of these problems actually, you need to rationalize it. And by that, I mean that you need to make sure that you can get an actual number in the denominator as opposed to that imaginary number. So in order to do that, all you need to do is times this fraction by I over I. And when you multiply straight across, you get 3i. And in denominator, you get I squared, which of course, again, keep in mind that I squared is -1. Then you just need to cross this out and put -1. Okay. And so your answer is 3i over -1. You can't leave it that way. You can't have that -1 in the denominator. So we're just going to move the negative to the top and have -3i as your answer. You could put -3i over 1 if you wanted as well. Okay, next one, same thing. We're going to multiply by I over I, straight across the top, 5i. Straight across the bottom, I squared. That thing becomes -1. So you have 5i over -1, which is really -5i. And again, you could put -5 over 1 if you want. Last one on this page, again, 7i. Multiply it by I over I on the top. Again, straight across the top, you get 4i. Straight across the bottom, you get 7i squared. The I squared is -1, so you would have 4i over -7. And that you can leave that way. But if you wanted to change it, you could leave it just like this because there's not a -1 in the denominator, there's a -7. Or you could have it as -4i over 7, your choice. So once again, if there's a -1, let's get that -1. If there's a -1 in those denominators, you need to change it. But if there's a -7, you really don't. But we'd like to see it where it is in the top. That negative number is really in the top. Okay, so let's try a couple. Okay, so again, 8i in the denominator. We're going to multiply by I over I. 9i at the top, 8i squared at the bottom. I squared is -1. And so you have 9i over -8. Number 2. Same thing, I in the denominator, I over I. 2i over 7i squared. And that's really, again, multiplied by -1 here. It's really 2i over -7. And again, I said you could have moved that negative to the top. This is the answer, but you could also make it -2i over 7 instead if you wanted. Because there's not a -1 there, there's a -7. Okay, one more. Okay, this is really -7 over I. So we're just going to multiply by I. And you get -7i over I squared, which is really -7i over -1. The negatives will cancel out. 7i over 1 or just 7i. Okay. Let's try these. First one. Again, let's make it a little bigger so you can see it. We're going to multiply this by I over I. So you get I over 3i squared, which is really just I over -3 because that became the -1. And you can leave it like that. If you have I over 3i, in actuality, those i's could just cancel out and your answer is going to be 1/3. But let me show it to you multiplying by I. You get I squared at the top. At the bottom, you get 3i squared. So at the top, you get -1 because that's -1. At the bottom, negative 3, and that's really just 1 over 3. What I had said in the beginning of this problem is if you just canceled that out, there's a 1 there, right? That answer right away is 1 over 3. Okay. One more like this. Multiply by I over I. You get negative 5I over negative I squared. This is negative 1. Use the parentheses. Negative 5I over 1, negative 5I. Okay. Let's see what else we got. Okay, so here you have to distribute. If you just have I, I'll make that a little better for you. If you multiply this by I over I, you get, at the bottom, let's do the denominator first. Right here you get 4I squared. At the top you get 3I plus 2I squared. So 3I minus 2, because that becomes negative 1. And at the bottom, negative 4, because this becomes negative 1. Okay, so that's your answer. One more. I over I. At the bottom, 3I squared. At the top, negative 3I plus 5I squared. And again, in the denominator first, this is really negative 1. So you have negative 3 here. And at the top, you have negative 3I plus 5 times negative 1. So that's really negative 3I minus 5 over negative 3. Now listen, if you're doing IXL, it's going to ask you to reduce. So this fraction really is negative 3I over negative 3 minus 5 over negative 3, because this, if you reduce it, will come out to be just I, right? And that's going to be plus here, plus 5 over 3. And in A plus BI form, it's going to be 5 over 3 plus I. And that's your answer.